Years ago, a series of deaths under mysterious circumstances began making headlines in American newspapers. The victims belonged to the Osage indigenous tribe, which had discovered oil on their lands in the state of Oklahoma a few decades earlier. In the 1920s, the Osage Nation was among the wealthiest peoples in the world, with oil-derived fortunes estimated at over $30 million per year, equivalent to over $400 million, about our $2 billion, in today's values. At a time when Native Americans in the United States still did not have automatic citizenship rights and were victims of prejudice, many members of the Osage Nation led luxurious lives with mansions, chauffeured cars, domestic servants, jewelry, and expensive clothes. But this prosperity soon attracted the interest of fraudsters and criminals. The total number of victims is not known for certain, but it is estimated that at least 60 people, both tribe members and witnesses and investigators, were murdered or disappeared between 1921 and 1925. The wave of crimes became known as the Reign of Terror and became the first major homicide case for the agency that would later become the FBI. This chapter of American history, which was forgotten for decades, is now the subject of the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese. The film is based on the best-selling book of the same name by David Grann, published in 2017. In the late 19th century, when the Osage Indians left the state of Kansas and arrived in the area that would become the future state of Oklahoma, they had already been forced by the federal government to leave their lands like other tribes. In 1872, once again displaced, the Osage purchased approximately 595,000 hectares that no one wanted since they were not suitable for agriculture. But there was oil in this area, and in the following years, the indigenous people began to make a fortune. Royalties were paid to the tribe as a whole and distributed equally among the members, with each beneficiary receiving an equal share, says the Oklahoma Historical Society. This right was hereditary and passed on to the immediate legal heirs of a deceased beneficiary, and it was not necessary to belong to the Osage tribe to inherit this right. The wealth of the Osage began to attract attention with reports in newspapers and magazines. White outsiders from across the country settled in the region, many seeking marriage with wealthy Native Americans. The federal government also began to interfere, determining that Native Americans classified as incompetent by a court would need a white guardian to manage their money. This system was not supervised, and historians say that many guardians irregularly took large sums of money from the indigenous people. As news of the fortune spread, opportunists arrived in Osage lands, seeking to separate them from their wealth by any means necessary, even murder, says the FBI on its page about the case. The Reign of Terror was a terrible period for the Osage people, says the tribal government. It all began in the early 1920s, a time that should have been prosperous. The oil boom was in full swing, and the Osage people were thriving. The first cases to attract attention occurred in May 1921. The decomposed body of Anna Brown, an Osage Indian, was found in a ravine in a remote area. The undertaker discovered a gunshot wound to her neck, says the FBI. Another indigenous individual, Charles Whitehorn, was also found dead with gunshot wounds. Anna's sister, Minnie, had already died recently from a mysterious illness. In July 1921, 2 months after Anna's body was found, her mother, Lizzie Q. Kyle, also died under mysterious circumstances. There was suspicion of poisoning, notes the Oklahoma Historical Society. In addition to her own share of the oil income, Lizzie had also inherited the rights of her first husband and 2 deceased daughters. 2 years later, in 1923, a cousin of Anna and nephew of Lizzie, Henry Roan, was shot and killed. In March of that year, another daughter of Lizzie and sister of Anna, Rita Smith, was killed along with her husband, William E. Smith, and their maid, Nettie Brookshire, when their house was destroyed by an explosion. During this period, there were over 20 other deaths linked to the tribe, also without explanation. Anyone who raised suspicions and pointed to evidence of what might be happening received death threats or was killed, like lawyer Vaughan, who was thrown off a train, says the FBI. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society, these crimes were rarely investigated, and many remain unsolved to this day. The deaths of some alleged victims who did not have visible injuries were simply attributed to indigestion, peculiar diseases, or unknown causes. All the deceased Native Americans had rights to the oil income, which they could pass on to their heirs. In the case of Anna, Lizzie, and Rita, their fortune was inherited by the sole surviving family member, Molly, who was married to a white man, Ernest Burkhart. Molly Burkhart was devastated and also afflicted by a mysterious illness, says the FBI. Later, investigators would discover that she was also being poisoned. The community was terrified by so many deaths, but local authorities' investigations yielded no results. A series of private detectives and other investigators found nothing, and some even tried to divert honest efforts, says the FBI. In March 1923, the Tribal Council asked the federal government to send detectives to help investigate the cases, and the Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI, sent a group of agents to the Osage Territory. At the time, the BOI was still a small agency, less than 20 years old, with agents who were not trusted by the population. The deaths of the Osage Indians would become their first major homicide case and are considered a crucial milestone in the creation of the FBI. The period coincided with the arrival of J. Edgar Hoover, who was appointed director of the BOI at just 29 years old and began to transform the agency's culture. He would become the first director of the FBI, where he served until his death in a career spanning almost half a century. According to the FBI, from the beginning, suspicions pointed to William Hale, a white cattleman born in Texas who became a powerful figure in Osage Territory, owning banks and stores and wielding great political influence. Hale was Ernest Burkhart's uncle, Molly's husband. If Anna, the first victim, her mother and two sisters died, all the rights related to oil income would pass to Ernest, and Hale could take control, says the FBI. Without intervention, Molly, already sick from the poison she had unknowingly consumed, and Ernest would probably have died soon, highlights the Oklahoma Historical Society. However, even with the suspicions, the investigations faced several obstacles. The locals didn't want to talk, says the FBI. Hale had threatened or bribed many of them, and others simply distrusted strangers. Hale also planted false clues that confused the investigators. The BOI then decided to send a group of undercover agents to the Osage Territory, posing as insurance salesmen or cattle buyers, among other professions. Under the command of Tom White, the agents gradually gained the trust of the residents. Their initial focus was on the death of Henry Roan. When questioned, Ernest Burkhart implicated John Ramsey in Roan's murder. Ramsey, a local cowboy, admitted that he had been hired by Hale to kill Roan, says the Oklahoma Historical Society. Ramsey also confessed to his involvement in the Smiths' murder and implicated Hale as the mastermind, as well as two other men who had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after the explosion that killed the couple and their maid. According to the FBI, the agents were able to prove that Hale had ordered both the murders of Molly's family with the aim of inheriting their oil-related rights, and the murder of Henry Roan, who had a life insurance policy with Hale as the beneficiary. Additionally, he had ordered the killing of other people who threatened to reveal what they knew. Hale, Burkhart, and Ramsey were arrested in January 1926. 3 months later, two other men, Kelsey Morrison and Byron Burkhart, Ernest Burkhart's brother, were indicted for the murder of Anna Brown. The trials, in state and federal courts, lasted 3 years and attracted intense media attention. Ernest Burkhart, Hale, Ramsey, and Morrison were sentenced to life imprisonment, but later gained their freedom. Burkhart was eventually pardoned by the governor of Oklahoma in 1965. Hale lived to the age of 87 and is buried in Wichita, Kansas, says the Osage Nation government. In 1925, to prevent another reign of terror, the U.S. Congress passed a law prohibiting non-Osage individuals from inheriting tribal members' rights to oil. However, according to the Osage government, about 26% of these rights still remain in the hands of individuals and institutions of non-tribal members today. To venture into a trove of other curious stories, rich in intrigue and wonder, we welcome you to our channel, Brain Outside the Box. Join us as we uncover the veiled mysteries and enthralling narratives that beckon from the corners of history and imagination, unraveling tales that challenge the ordinary and beckon the extraordinary. Thanks for watching. Bye.